Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover your monthly check just changed without warning, without explanation, and affecting millions of Americans just like you. The Social Security Administration just signed a critical payment adjustment order that's sending shockwaves through retirement communities nationwide. If you're currently receiving benefits or planning to retire soon, what happens in the next few weeks could directly impact your financial security for years to come. Right now, there's massive confusion about who's affected, when these changes take effect, and most importantly, how much money we're actually talking about. The mainstream media isn't giving you the full picture, and the SSA's official notices are buried in bureaucratic language that's nearly impossible to understand. Here's what nobody's telling you: this isn't just another cost of living adjustment. This adjustment order carries specific provisions that could mean the difference between maintaining your current lifestyle and making some very tough choices, whether you're 62 or 82, whether you've been collecting benefits for decades or just applied last month. You need to understand exactly what's changing and how to protect yourself. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where you stand and what actions you need to take right now. Let me start by being completely honest with you. The Social Security system is going through one of its most significant transformations in recent history, and the timing couldn't be more critical for millions of Americans who depend on these benefits to survive. What we're seeing right now isn't just another routine update or a simple recalculation. This is a fundamental shift in how payments are structured, processed, and distributed. And if you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes, you could end up losing money that rightfully belongs to you. Now, before we dive into the specifics of this new adjustment order, I want you to understand something crucial. The Social Security Administration processes over 70 million payments every single month. That's not a small operation. We're talking about an incredibly complex system that touches the lives of roughly 1 in 5 Americans. When changes happen at this level, even small adjustments can create massive ripple effects across the entire country. And what we're dealing with right now is anything but small. So let's talk about what actually happened. The SSA recently signed an adjustment order that modifies how certain benefit calculations are processed, particularly for individuals who fall into specific earning categories during their working years. This isn't affecting everyone equally, which is part of what makes this so confusing and frankly so frustrating for people trying to figure out if they're impacted. The order specifically targets discrepancies that have been building up in the system over the past several years. Discrepancies that many recipients didn't even know existed until now. Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little bit concerning. Over the past decade, the SSA's computer systems have been gradually updated and modernized, which sounds like a good thing, right? But during these transitions, certain calculation errors crept into the system. We're not talking about intentional fraud or anything sinister. These were genuine technical glitches that affected how some benefits were computed. The problem is that these errors weren't caught immediately, which means thousands of people have either been receiving slightly more or slightly less than they should have been getting all along. The adjustment order that just got signed is essentially the government's way of correcting these mistakes. But correction doesn't always mean what you think it means. For some people, this correction will result in increased payments moving forward, which is obviously wonderful news. But for others, and this is the part that's causing so much anxiety in retirement communities across America, it means potential reductions or what the SSA calls recovery of overpayments. Let me explain what that actually means in plain English, because the official terminology is deliberately vague and confusing. When the SSA discovers they've been paying you more than you were technically entitled to receive, they have the legal authority to recover that money. Now, they're not going to show up at your door demanding a check for thousands of dollars. That's not how it works. Instead, what typically happens is they reduce your future payments until the overpayment is recovered. Imagine budgeting your entire month around getting $1,500, and then suddenly you're only receiving $1,300 because the government decided they overpaid you 2 years ago due to their own computer error. That $200 difference might not sound like much to some people, but for seniors living on fixed incomes, it can mean choosing between medications and groceries. But here's what makes this situation even more complicated. The adjustment order doesn't just address past errors, it also implements new calculation methodologies for future payments. This means that even if you haven't been affected by any previous mistakes, your future benefit amounts could still change based on these new formulas. The SSA claims these new methods are more accurate and fair. But accurate and fair are relative terms when you're the one watching your expected retirement income shift without warning. Let me break down who's most likely to be affected by these changes because understanding whether you're in the crosshairs is absolutely essential. First, if you started collecting benefits between 2018 and 2023, you need to pay very close attention. This is the window where most of the system errors occurred, which means your initial benefit calculation might have been based on flawed data. Second, if you worked in jobs that had fluctuating income, things like commission-based sales, seasonal work, or self-employment, your earnings records are more susceptible to calculation errors because they're more complex to process. Third, and this is really important, if you've ever had to correct your earnings record with the Social Security Administration, there's a higher chance that subsequent calculations were affected by those corrections. Sometimes when one piece of data gets updated in the system, it doesn't trigger automatic recalculations of related benefits, which creates inconsistencies that can persist for years. Fourth, if you're receiving benefits based on a former spouse's earnings record through divorce, or if you're collecting survivor benefits, these cases involve more complex calculations that were more prone to the technical glitches we're talking about. Now, let's talk about the timeline because when these changes actually take effect matters enormously for your planning purposes. The adjustment order was signed recently, but implementation is going to roll out in phases over the next several months. The SSA is starting with the most significant discrepancies first, cases where people have been overpaid or underpaid by substantial amounts. If you fall into this category, you should receive a formal notice in the mail within the next 60 to 90 days. This notice will explain exactly how your benefits are changing and why. For people with smaller discrepancies, the adjustments might not happen until later in the year. And for those who aren't affected by past errors, but will see changes due to the new calculation methodologies, those adjustments will likely begin appearing in payments issued next year. The staggered rollout is supposed to make the transition smoother and give the SSA time to handle the inevitable flood of questions and appeals. But it also creates this prolonged period of uncertainty where people don't know if they're going to be affected or not. Here's something that almost nobody is talking about, but it's absolutely critical. If you receive a notice saying you've been overpaid and the SSA plans to reduce your future benefits to recover that money, you have rights. You can appeal this decision, and in many cases you can request what's called a waiver. A waiver basically means you're asking the government to forgive the overpayment because recovering it would create financial hardship for you. The SSA is actually required by law to consider these waiver requests, but most people don't know they exist because the notices sent out don't exactly advertise this option in bold letters. Let me tell you what financial hardship means in this context, because it's not as strict as you might think. You don't have to prove you're destitute or living in poverty. You just need to demonstrate that recovering the overpayment would prevent you from meeting your ordinary and necessary living expenses, things like housing, food, medical care, and utilities. If you're living paycheck to paycheck on your Social Security income, which millions of American seniors are, you almost certainly qualify for hardship consideration. The problem is that requesting a waiver requires paperwork, documentation, and understanding a bureaucratic process that can feel overwhelming, especially if you're dealing with health issues or you're not comfortable with complex forms. But here's my point. Don't let the complexity intimidate you into just accepting a payment reduction that could devastate your monthly budget. The system has protections built in, but you have to actively use them. Now, let's talk about what you should be doing right now today, regardless of whether you think you're affected or not. First, you need to create or log in to your My Social Security account on the official SSA website. This is your portal to see your complete benefits history, your earnings record, and any notices the SSA has sent you. If you haven't set up this account yet, do it immediately. It takes about 15 minutes, and you'll need to verify your identity. But once it's set up, you have 24/7 access to your information. Second, review your earnings history for accuracy. This is something you should be doing annually anyway, but it's especially important right now. Look at every year you worked and make sure the earnings shown match what you actually made. If you spot discrepancies, you need to contact the SSA and provide documentation like tax returns or W-2 forms to get them corrected. Remember, your benefit amount is based on your highest 35 years of earnings, so even small errors can add up to significant differences in your monthly check. Third, calculate what your benefit should be based on your earnings record. There are online calculators available, including ones on the SSA website that let you input your earnings and see what your expected benefit is. Compare that calculation to what you're actually receiving. If there's a significant difference, that's a red flag that you might be affected by these adjustments. Document everything. Fourth, understand that if you're notified of an overpayment, you typically have 60 days from the date of that notice to file an appeal or request a waiver. Don't wait until day 59 to start dealing with this. The moment you receive any notice about benefit changes, start gathering your financial documentation. You'll need to show your income, your expenses, your assets, and basically paint a complete picture of your financial situation. The more organized and thorough you are, the better your chances of a successful appeal or waiver approval. Let me address something that's causing a lot of confusion and frankly a lot of fear. Some people are worried that these adjustments are the first step toward broader cuts to Social Security. I want to be very clear about this. What we're discussing here is separate from the larger debates about Social Security's long-term funding challenges. Yes, the Social Security Trust Fund faces funding issues that need to be addressed by Congress in the coming years, but this particular adjustment order is about correcting administrative errors and updating calculation methods. These are two completely different issues, even though they're both happening around the same time. That said, it's absolutely true that Social Security is under financial pressure. The program is still solvent and will continue paying benefits, but without legislative changes, there will eventually need to be benefit reductions or tax increases to maintain full funding. That's a reality we need to acknowledge, but it's not what's driving these current adjustments. Don't let anyone conflate these issues or use this adjustment order as evidence that Social Security is collapsing, because that's simply not accurate. What is accurate, though, is that navigating the Social Security system has become increasingly complicated, and the burden of understanding these complications falls disproportionately on seniors who are least equipped to deal with bureaucratic complexity. The SSA has faced budget cuts and staffing shortages for years, which means wait times for phone calls can be hours long and in-person offices are often overwhelmed. Getting clear answers to specific questions about your situation can feel nearly impossible, and that's by far the most frustrating part of this entire situation. Here's my advice for dealing with the SSA effectively. When you call, do it early in the morning on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. These are typically the least busy times. Have your Social Security number, date of birth, and any relevant notice numbers ready before you call. Write down the name and employee ID of whoever you speak with, along with the date and time of the call. Take detailed notes about what they tell you. If you need to call back for follow-up, having this information makes the process much smoother. If you're not getting satisfactory answers over the phone, consider scheduling an appointment at your local Social Security office. Yes, wait times for appointments can be long, but in-person meetings often result in more thorough assistance than phone calls. Bring every document that might be relevant: your earnings records, tax returns, benefit statements, previous correspondence, everything. It's better to have something and not need it than to need it and have to schedule another appointment months later. One more thing I want to emphasize. If you're feeling overwhelmed by this, you're not alone, and there are resources available to help you. Every state has organizations that provide free assistance with Social Security issues. There are also advocacy groups specifically focused on senior benefits that can provide guidance or even representation if you need to appeal a decision. You don't have to navigate this alone, and you shouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed to ask for help. The system is deliberately complex, and there's no prize for figuring it out on your own. The bottom line is this: stay informed, stay proactive, and don't ignore notices from the Social Security Administration. These changes are happening whether we like them or not, and the people who fare best are those who understand what's happening and take action to protect their interests. Your Social Security benefits are money you earned through decades of hard work. You have every right to make sure you're receiving exactly what you're entitled to. And you have every right to challenge decisions that seem incorrect or unfair.